Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christine Espinosa Orlando, Associate Director at Godwin Austin Johnson, and I'm here in front of you together with these amazing panels that flew over from different countries globally to share with you their experiences and expertise about master planning. When you think about master plan, what comes into your mind is just the shiny renders. It's about the boulevards, all these renders, natural landscaping. But has it ever come to your thought about what comes in a Tuesday afternoon at 43 degrees? Have you ever thought about how my kid will walk from one place to another? Or how would be an afternoon experience would be? Would it be a safe stroll? Would it be comfortable? Well, that's what this discussion is all about. It's about making sure that the master plan we built, the master plan that we design and we plan is actually livable. We're going past beyond the pretty pictures. I'm standing in here because I know it's gonna be tiny for me to sit down, but we're going past beyond the pretty pictures, the Instagrammable moments, but we will discuss what really truly matters. Master plan, living in, experiencing, because buildings, a master plan is not just about buildings. It's not just about the landscaping. It's about experiences and the way we live in, the way we connect and celebrate. Thankfully, I'm not only by myself discussing this very important matter. Behind me are all the gentlemen who flew over from different parts of the globe to be here in front of you. Let me start off with Bryce Schneider, Design Director from Nolte. I've written a bit about you. So, Bryce Schneider, Design Director at Nolte, who proves light doesn't just illuminate a street, it shapes how we feel it. We also have Eric Hokanson, Principal and Board Member of AE7, who turns empty land into living stories through masterful placemaking. Matthew Utley, Principal at Grimshaw, who grounds big visions in sustainability and community. And of course, I've been with Steven on several panels. Steven Vellergreen is Design Director at Gensler, who treats cities as an ecosystem with landscapes as active infrastructure. And we have Viggo Haremst, partner at Henning Larsen, who reminds us that inviting nature is the surest way to keep people alive, keep people there. Together, we're gonna be debating, we're gonna be challenging, and hopefully a laugh here and there. But in the end, what we wanted is to move from the big picture, from vision to real and lived communities. So let me start off with a simple icebreaker. Who among you, I know how Saudi summer is really tough. Let me start with a question. Summers here are no joke. How many of you have avoided walking outside even for 5 minutes because of the heat? Or how many of you decided to walk here instead of driving? So that exactly is why this talk, that exactly why this talk is really important. So let's dive in. Welcome to our panel discussion, Beyond the Master Plan, Designing Developments People Actually Want to Live in. Let me start off with Eric.
Yes, hello.
Yes, hi Eric. Eric, you often talk about story as a design driver. How do you ensure identity isn't lost at a scale?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, and it's really important when we think about master planning. And, I think when we look at master plans, of course, initially you have to look at where is the master plan, what kind of environment are you building within, what is the context, what is the local character or the culture that you're building within. Are you building in the desert? Are you building close to the sea? And then we try to identify and look at, what are some of the unique features of the project, or as you would say sometimes, unique selling proposition that identify or make the project unique, make the project special. And that should be grounded in place. It should be grounded in the user interface, like you talked about. You're saying we don't want to stay in renders. We want to actually make things that people live within. And a lot of that comes down to what is the customer journey? What is the day in the life of different individuals that are going to occupy that development? And so I think as far as scale, you can start with a story, a big narrative that everyone can buy into. It's extremely important to have a narrative that not only your design team, but also the client, more importantly, can buy into, they can embrace, and that becomes inspiration to take this project forward, whether it be something grounded in nature or biophilic design, this type of thing, which is very trendy now, but very real. Or is it value proposition driven by a developer who wants to make good return on his investment or her investment, and making sure that the product that you define is in the right place? So I think all of us could elaborate on this, but very good question, and thank you for that.
Matthew, how do you embed livability and sustainability into these mega plans so they don't become empty shells?
I think to answer that, we kind of take a step back and look at the overall agenda. If you and you pose the question about what is kind of defining the opportunity. What are the opportunities, both for design as well as for the residents, for the developer? If you look at the Vision 2030 plan, it's an opportunity to sort of develop a new urban agenda. At the heart of the 2030 vision is livability, sustainability, cultural vibrancy, and all of those play into the development of a livable city or a livable master plan. If you look at cultural vibrancy, maybe as an individual item, sometimes I think it's a little hard to achieve something that resonates with people. And we're not talking about mimicry or pastiche, but actually something that drives and sits at the heart of what people want to experience and what resonates with them. And usually it's something that kind of sits around the realm of uniqueness. What's the diversity of the experience? How unique is the experience? And how does it then resonate with the inhabitants of the place? Now, to do that, one of the things you have to look at is the individual culture, the individual place for which you are designing. We had a large project in region a few years back, and it was kind of the typical mall, residential, hotel, 3 million square feet or so. And then you start thinking, well, how do you bring in that cultural relevance or vibrancy into something of that scale? So you have to kind of go out into the community. You look at the way that people live. You look at, for here, it was the soup culture. You look at the culinary culture, the spice markets and things of that nature. And then you see how those spaces are arranged. And then that automatically will then sort of transcend old to new and resonate with people because it's somewhat familiar, even in a new context. And that provides probably a more important level of sustainability, which is the social sustainability of the place. The environmental sustainability is obviously a given, but I think one of the challenges that we have today is providing something that is also socially sustainable, especially when a lot of the market is driven by return on investment and the new. It's the challenge is staying relevant to the people, not relevant to the market, but relevant to the people. So if those things are embedded, then I think you'll end up with a place that is livable, it's sustainable across many different areas, and in turn, it'll be something of value.
This is why I like this conversation, is because what happens behind master plans is the storytelling behind it, placemaking, the storytelling, understanding sustainability and community. Now you mentioned about large scale developments. In large-scale developments worldwide, some of them prioritize cars and investors over people and pedestrians. Stephen, on series of panels that we've been together, you have argued that cities are ecosystems. How do we make walkability a human-scale integral rather than an afterthought?
That's the million-dollar question, really, isn't it? And to explain or elaborate a little bit, the reason we talk about ecosystems as a model for cities is it's systems and systems, seeing both inert and active systems as all part of one cohesive whole. Now, what that eventually means is that you've got to get down to scales where you think about the pedestrian experience. We actually can think of master planning from a bottom-up approach. And what I mean by that is you can think about, well, what does a person need to walk through Riyadh in the summer? And how does that turn into a design driver? It can be as simple as shade and air. I came in from Dubai yesterday. I find it much more comfortable to walk in Riyadh if there's shade, because it's a drier heat that we have here. The problem has been that we have inherited a legacy of cities across this region that were designed with an American model of car-dominant sort of urbanism. And so it's hard to unpack that. It's very difficult. What we're starting to see, though, is that we can make incremental change. And so we can take a slice of the city that is constrained in the way that it's currently working, and we can sort of address that. If we can start sort of thinking about the way these systems are interdependent, thinking about what we do as master planners, as creating a living system, and we intervene in the ecology, the sort of the climate, the way that people use spaces, the story, the cultural context of these things. We actually have to consider all those things, and that's one of the real challenges of master planning projects. The biggest project I'm working on at the moment is 80,000 square kilometres. How do you think about a person's journey through that place when you're working at that scale? And it is incredibly difficult, and it takes, for us, and the way we approach it, is actually thinking about these layers, the independent layers. We think about ecology and how that works. Where do we actually create the best natural microclimates on a site by looking at ecology? How does that then turn into a space that people need for walking? How do we then think about building? So it's actually in building these things up, thinking about it in a way, ecology as a motherboard, and the buildings and places that you create plug into that motherboard. If we don't create the motherboard, the computer doesn't work. So I don't know that I've given a complete answer here, but the problem is it's a really difficult question. And we always just have to keep trying to do a better job than we have done the last time.
Yeah. And this is why we have this conversation, is to challenge all of you. Come on, you all flew from different places in the globe. Okay. You mentioned about moving people from one point to another. Earlier, I had a discussion with Bryce, and he is leading the lighting design within Middle East and even within the region. He mentioned a lot of projects that he has been involved with. In terms of light, what role does light provide within master planners? And because you mentioned to me that you were going to be challenging my question, because I was forcing you to discuss only about infrastructure. So now it's your turn. Bryce, let us know.
Yes, hello everyone. So, yeah, it is important that we're not entering in this kind of approach of people moving to point A and to point B only. And I will not. I will give you a straight answer, of course. I mean, it would be difficult for me to give you a straight answer, but it's true question. The project, is that we try to come to this kind of collective wisdom and to use the tool of lighting and how people can connect to their surrounding, right? How they can fall in love with their city. So certainly, how people move in the city is an important item to look into it, but how we can, create those emotional resonance with the elements that are created in the city, what kind of atmosphere we should then put, or create in city, for who, at what time, what is the best light at the best time. Yesterday night we have a solar eclipse. We could also change the tone of light so people can then enjoy what's happening in surroundings. So it's really try to connect people with their, in French we say terroir, or what is this genius loci of an area, and try to find this kind of connection that for us in lighting, of course, in collaboration of all the designers, and try to ask those questions that you can envision. You can have a better vision on what will be then the right lighting atmosphere for a certain period of time and for this very specific location, because we wish people to connect with the surrounding. And I think it's very important for our future, 2030, 2050, is belonging, and as well put as well some kind of roots on where you are, and as well use your public realm as well at night. And of course we have a fantastic tool to do that, and maybe a very easy tool to use when city are starting to emerge as new developing around Saudi Arabia. Thank you.
Can I just jump in there for a sec?
Yes, definitely.
I think as Bas was speaking, it occurred to me that we often think about things in separate terms. But just to draw an analogy, the way that we sort of talk about living systems, light has an impact on organisms. If you look at recent studies on LED lighting in streets, it changes the circadian rhythm of people. So one of the things I often try to fight against is the separation of sort of design into disciplines. And it's only when we work together holistically that we actually achieve great things.
That's correct, but talking about lighting atmosphere doesn't mean automatically that you have to lit everything. So it means that you have also to decide what are the darker infrastructure that you want to put, where you should be, where should the city be dark at certain point of the time, where you should provide a gentle amount of light to provide sense of circulation, and where then you can bring work on layers or shades to connect people to the night and their surroundings. So lighting doesn't only involve to light everything, because if you come only into a movement, you want to create memory and not only ensure people moving from point A from B. You want to create atmosphere. So of course, darkness is a very important item to plan in the city, and also have calm dark area, also to facilitate some this green corridor, and then that people can you have this kind of juxtaposition between built environment and natural environment, biophilia, to bring some shadow during daylight in your interior, or enjoying some greenery, etc., or tone down the light because there's some migratory bird passing by in a certain. I mean, these things can also evolve into much more refined scheme thanks to technology. And then I think, I better stop, because if not, I can talk over and over.
We see how passionate you are when it comes to lighting. Now I'm going to jump into Vigo. You've championed the idea that if nature isn't invited in, the city becomes hostile. What lessons should Saudi's new development learn from integrating landscape and ecology?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here, and I mean, it's a pretty crazy pool of knowledge that we have here. I think it's been said just before that it is not only either or. I think it's extremely much to understand the holistic view of different areas that you work in. It's a very diplomatic and boring answer, but I mean, when we attack certain challenges when it comes to a master planning scale, we often do it with the mindset of an architect. Mm-hmm. And how we understand to get to the best result is to think about it as a half design and a half process. And then I think what was said before, to think about like what is really important for people, but people are also very different. So I'm not really sure that I agree with darkness, because for me it's much more about safety and young girls and all of that, in terms of finding the right balance and making mistakes extremely fast in that process. But to just come back to your question, there is a huge difference when there is nature, and when you kind of allow nature to be part of, like a cultural driver or a community driver kind of idea. Nice. And it doesn't need to be 2.5 million square meter in Kaft. It can be a smaller area where you introduce the sense of nature, and then people will follow. So, I mean, it's one way of looking at how to activate something that hasn't been activated before, and then you start to have the system that Stephen is talking about, the ecosystem in a sense. So it's one thing.
Okay. You mentioned about culture or nature as a driver. I'm going to go to Eric. Eric, the heritage and culture are huge drivers of identity, as how Vigo mentioned earlier. How do you reflect them in design without creating something that feels like a theme park?
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I mean, when I was working in the States a while ago now, we always talked about it as kind of Disneyfication of projects, and architects and designers that are sensitive to good design really try to stay away from this kind of approach. But there is something to be learned by that type of design and architecture, in that it allows people to connect in a certain way. But it's more of a themed approach. I mean, I think again, back to the story or creating the lifestyle of a place is also about trying to identify a place or a context in a very real way, and not trying to attach faux or fake things to that to arrive at a story. Be honest. Be more intuitive and kind of, let's say, aware of a particular circumstance. And if you do that and you're honest with yourself and your design team, you'll get to the right place. But yeah, we in particular really try to stay away from that kind of architecture and that kind of design process, especially in planning. But as I said before, there is something to be said about those kinds of environments and why people are attracted to them. But they're not places that you want to live in all the time. It might be a place you want to experience as part of entertainment or as an escape. In that way, it's like watching a movie or being part of some sort of an entertainment environment. But I think the places that we want to live and be a part of are more authentic. And I think resonating back to nature, I live here now during the week, but my family and I live in Dubai in a community called Al Barari, and it's absolutely fantastic because there's landscape everywhere. And I can take my dogs for a walk. I can take my young daughter for a walk, and it's quite spectacular. And yes, as Stephen said, Dubai to me is more uncomfortable because of the humidity, but the shade from the trees in that kind of environment make a huge difference. It's just absolutely spectacular. So as much as we can bring that kind of authenticity into the work that we do, I think we're all more successful, and I think the people that engage in those kind of environments and those kind of developments are much happier.
I think what we can add in is, I've also been involved in series of master plans previously, and what I could learn is that context and history that is rooted into people actually adds in the master plan. There's the identity that you mentioned, there's the realism, and there's the honesty in the response. As Vigo mentioned, we could learn from the past, but do mistakes really promptly and quickly. Now, I'm going to be jumping into Stephen. What strategies have you found that balances investor returns with community well-being? Because, of course, commercial side also matters when it comes to master plan, and developments must perform financially. But do investors prioritize always align with what people want, or even so architects want?
Great question. You have to make it align. And I'm going to take a little bit of a roundabout way to get to that answer. Vigo was talking about nature in cities. And I think it's critically important to understand one thing he said about nature being a process. We often treat nature as nature is there, it's a place. City is there, it's another place. And that's not how it works. Cities are ecologies as well. Right? You can see in any crack in any pavement or a crack in a wall, you'll see a strangling fig tree growing out of it, given the course of time. The process doesn't stop because we build a city. And so we shouldn't actually start divorcing the city and nature. We have to think about those as something that work together. And I'm saying that because a lot of the time in the work that we do, we talk about, let's think about these ecologies. How do we do reforestation? How do we restore this landscape? How do we think about water in this area? A lot of the work that we've been doing on master plans lately have been focused on how does that make financial sense? And there's a really simple answer that is extremely complex to apply. But what we've been looking at in recent times is sustainable finance mechanisms. And so we were recently working on a master plan for a large project in Laos. It was a hospitality master plan. What we convinced the client to do was say, well, okay, you've got, and this is touching on a few different things, but you've got rice paddies in this valley, amazing cast limestone cliffs. You've got forests and bamboo forests here. So why don't we think about this as, a net positive approach? And what does that mean? So we looked at how we could harvest bamboo, manufacture bamboo components on site, use natural bamboo structures for all of the buildings, look at the rice paddies as part of the water management system, because it is a traditional water management system. So how could we give the developer a golf course, but also thread that golf course around these rice paddies? And there was resistance to those things. And then it was like, well, how do we actually control water? It's a tropical environment. Water floods this place. So it was like, well, we can put in retention mechanisms, which will give you a fresh water supply and hydroelectric energy. So how much hydroelectric do you need? So we went through this process of looking through these systems of systems. At the end, what we actually presented to the client was a way that they could do all of the energy infrastructure, all of the water infrastructure, all of the bamboo ecosystem and the construction materials, and also upskilling of local residents, keeping them in place, keeping in authenticity, all of which was funded by a sustainable finance mechanism. And so the profitability is important. We always used to tell people, here's the right thing to do, and they would nod, and then they would say, who's going to pay for it? You would sort of say, I don't know. Now we've got a way to say who's going to pay for it. And this is something that is really powerful. I really want to emphasize it. By 2034, the quantum of sustainable finance mechanisms available for developments is going to be about $40 trillion US. Wow. $40 trillion of finance available for these things. When I talk to sustainable finance representatives of banks here, their biggest problem is they don't have anything big enough to invest in. So they say, well, someone's doing a retrofit of a building to make it LEED. I'll invest in that. That's the best I can do at the moment. So we have to bridge that. There is a solution where we can address things like climate change, make great cities and places, and pay for it and make it profitable. That's kind of the ultimate goal. That's the jackpot.
You spoke about sustainability, and for Matthew, I reach out to you. How do you persuade stakeholders that sustainability and livability aren't a cost, but value drivers? I know Stephen has mentioned some, but maybe you can add in more.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think we've entered into a time, we saw this with architecture a while back, where the ability to market and sell a particular designer or brand was proven to be a huge return on the investment for the sales of the project, right? Let's say in a residential building or something of that nature. I think in master plans we've kind of gotten to the same thing. There are so many master plans and they're so large that the clients, stakeholders, developers are seeing that there is a true return on investment for doing the things that we used to say were just right to do, but now are critical not just for let's say the branding of a development, but actually for the way that it functions and the way that it integrates into, let's say, a regional structure plan or something. And it has to be it kind of has to contribute to that. The master plans can no longer just take away or suck resources away from a regional plan or from a broader country vision. There's something interesting. You were talking about the cracks and crevices and the fig trees, and you do see that a lot. And there was some data, I think it was 2022 was the last data that they pulled, but roughly 0.3% of the surface of the planet is covered by impermeable surfaces, hard surfaces, something like that. Now, 0.3% doesn't sound like a lot, but then you look at, well, how much of the world is covered by oceans or water, etc. Where it comes into play, though, is when you start moving into developed areas, let's say medium to high density areas, that goes from 0.3% up to 50% of all land area is covered by impervious hard surfaces. If you get into an area that is let's call it a dense, or an ultra dense environment, you're approaching 90%. That means that water has to go somewhere. There's no place for plants to grow. They're finding their way through the cracks, right? And I think that sort of statistic translates into how we see cities and how we see master plans and what our experiences are. And if we feel, so let's say if nature feels that way, obviously that way as well. So one of the things that we've seen is an absolute acknowledgement of that return on investment, so that most master plan RFPs that we receive have some sort of, let's just call it a Central Park element to it. They've recognized that investors, residents, as well as cities and state governments or emirates find value in that. And they know it's a way to promote growth, right? Because that's something that people value. Now, we try and go beyond that, similar to what you were saying about some of the ways that you provide opportunity growing the bamboo. Most of our master plans, even our building designs, include some sort of aspect of biodiversity to promote biodiversity and productive landscape. So looking at indigenous plants, what can be productive, what can be used. Is it gardens for the residents? Is it gardens for the master plan? Or is it down to individual elements? Like when we did Terra, the sustainability pavilion for Expo 2020, during construction we found a bee colony, and we had to figure out how to move it. And we had to do it sensitively, and we went through and we got consultants to do this and consultants to do that. They preserved it, they relocated it, they moved it to site, and now that bee colony has become part of the biodiversity of Terra. And they now are running a program internally to promote bee colonies and financing for individuals and businesses and schools that want to promote that. So you can start at the master plan level, and then you work to the building level, and then you can go down to the flower and the bee level, right? And you have to provide that continuity all the way down, or else the master plans won't succeed. Because you kind of have to buy in, right? You have to go all in. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that initial acknowledgement of return on investment has amplifications all the way down the chain, down to the individual user and the ecology that surrounds us.
I do have a question to provoke everyone on the panel. Sadly, we don't have any developer in here, but this is a question for all of you. So we do the master plans, we design it from lighting to architecture, sustainability, and ecosystem. Knowing that none of you are developers, I just want to know if a development sells in the first 5 years, but after that people move out, would you consider that a success?
You mean that people leave the project?
Yes. So it's sold out in the first 5 years and then people leave. Would that be a success?
I would look who the neighbor would be, maybe.
Well, I think the change is natural as well. So there is sometimes a place quality that's great when it starts and then somewhere better. So that could explain things like that as well. But ultimately, I think that if you have a change where people move out of a project and no one moves in, there's clearly an issue. And we've seen that in the region with some of the, let's say, less well implemented projects in places like the UAE.
You have white elephants, yeah.
And I think we as a set of professionals
Yeah.
need to actually learn from those things and say, well, what is the failure? How can we address that? And I think it used to be a real problem because it was also the separation of the developer's interest from the greater good. Like the developer wanted to build, sell, get out of it. I think what's happened since then is there a lot of maturity in things like facilities management, and the way that developers holds part of a project, how they realise, well, if I do a good job in that project, I make more in my next project. And so that maturing has meant that people have an interest in firstly doing it better, which is what I've seen, and secondly in, you know what, this isn't working, we need to fix it.
Yes.
And
And move
you know,
on from, yeah.
that's, I'll take a direct example of City Walk 1 in Dubai.
Mm-hmm.
Successful development when it opened, very popular, pedestrian oriented, and it's closed now
Yes.
for redevelopment. But I don't think that's necessarily its failure, but accepting that we as a people and a city changes, and it's this organism idea.
It's an evolving landscape.
But City Walk was a failure because there was no critical mass of people there. I mean, it was if you go there and experienced it, it looked like it was well designed. It was had good context, everything else, but there was nobody there. There was no residential there or anything, and right behind it was a villa community, and everyone had to drive to get there. Once you got there, it was walkable. Yeah, I mean, that was a head scratcher from the very beginning for me. Yeah, I mean, I think this issue of developments and people leaving, there's a lot of cannibalism that goes on in the region because we're developing so much and there is a lot of population increase. I think it's up to the developers and the designers they work with to stay current and stay up on what is what is the thing that's making these plans work. And we talk about nature, livability. If you look at building developments, even in look at the build-to-rent markets. I mean, Dubai was very early in adopting amenities, into the projects. I'm getting away from planning, but that was very important in selling products because there was amenities as part of it. You had a swimming pool, you had a fitness facility, you had a movie theater, you had whatever, and it attracted people. So that was a change in the market at some point, and the buildings that didn't have that were left behind. So they had to adapt or something. Same thing with a master plan. So that's my opinion.
That's good. We learned a lot from past experiences, and we have mentioned Dubai. So in terms of Saudi market and Saudi's urban future, what should be the defining principle, as most of you, all of us, are working on Saudi projects? Let me start off with...
People first.
Okay. You want to add something?
No, I mean, I think Stephen can talk to this as well, and he talked on it a little bit, and Matthew as well. But people centric, and we talked about this idea of everything is car centric.
Yes.
To start with, kind of has to work that way at some level to get to the place. But when you're living in a community, you talk about kind of 15-minute walkable. And you have different, depends on how big the master plan. If you're working at 8,000 square meters, you're looking at a larger scale. But you want to be to a 5-minute walkable community that you can walk to your local market, or you can walk to your sustainable, trash dump or whatever it is, or you can ride your bike along a bicycle trail to get to a place you want to go. So you want to think about people focused in that kind of way.
But maybe just kind of elaborate just 2 seconds on that. When I was walking over here, I actually staying in a hotel on the other side of the street. And I was just like, no problem, I'm just going to walk over there. Of course I couldn't, because I couldn't cross the street, so I just got like an Uber that drove me all the way around, and then all the way around there, and then I ended up here. So, I mean, we've had our sustainability team for the past 17 years that flanks everything that we do globally, and it's the one thing that we've been discussing a lot for that part of time is human-centric design, people first, and so on. But we actually somewhat kind of navigated ourselves out of that. And it's now about being life-centric. And that's when it comes out like, well, I'm crossing the street, but so is also, the flora and fauna and the animals or whatever, and maybe not too much here yet, but, we have King Salman Park that might change that a bit.
Yes.
But, for example, we're doing a huge project in Singapore. Mm-hmm. The whole design is designed around accelerating the green corridor with all the animals and everything, so that can actually also come back to Singapore, which has, left a bit. So this holistic understanding of being life-centric and maybe thinking about what does that mean? I mean, going back to your first question, let's sit down and design a city.
Yes.
So being life-centric, what does that mean when we then think about cars, think about bikes, think about, well, where can I meet my future wife or whatever. These small moments that also makes, the teenage girls wants to come out, even though that it feels maybe a bit dark, it feels safe or whatever.
It's
So-
the memories in the communities, in the
which
master
are
plans
memorable
built
that you
in.
want to get back to. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Now let's do
attention,
some...
because we don't have the answer of everything. So it's also to responsibly come with, we have unknown in the project.
Definitely.
Super
And
important.
It's super important. So
Unplanned areas.
We are planning a space and envisage a space that hopefully people will take over, right, in a
Yes.
certain way. But we also have to plan and give flexibility in how these things can evolve in future. So very difficult to do with master planning because the timeline is very extended. You have the tree growing up and building up all this element together is very complex. But embracing that there is unknown in the project and be aware on that maybe can make us better prepare of accepting the city taking also different turns, and maybe futuring and maybe also plan for certain scenario that can come. If we talk only about mobility and also how things are evolving, we hope that things will evolve massively in the next 10 to 20 years, and that we don't have to rely only on cars. So, based only if you take that as an approach, well, your city, thinking can change drastically. Yeah, but if you then make certain assumption or you try to be a bit more future-proof, then your development can then probably evolve and thrive through difficult time, like for example COVID, etc., etc.
Accounting
So
for the
embracing
possibility.
the unknown sometimes is a strength and not be seen as a weak point.
Okay.
We don't have the answer for everything. We don't know certain things. Is a strength not to know sometimes and ask us more questions and gives also some flexibility to the space so that people can stay and live for longer term and make their place their home.
Stephen, would
I
like
wanted to
add?
pick up on both what Viggo and Bryce said.
Yeah.
If you and come back to your original question of how do we design for the diversity of Saudi Arabia. If we take this approach of we are designing for all life, not just human life, and we also then think about Saudi Arabia in a way, you have to start with where does this project sit, the place, right? I've been lucky. I've been able to work in places like Asir and Al Suda, which is 3,000 meters above sea level,
Yes.
a completely different climate, juniper forests. You don't think of that as when we talk about Saudi. We don't think of the Red Sea until very recently as part of Saudi Arabia. This is an incredibly varied nation, people, landscape. We have to sort of start by going to a place and actually understanding that place a little bit. You cannot, by remote control, understand how we actually design for living systems. And that's a challenge for us because we sort of, as professionals, learnt to sit at our desks and draw a city or a place. But we also have amazing tools nowadays
Yes.
that actually bring a lot of that knowledge to us. And I think that's the challenge. We have to accept we're responsible for it. And if we don't do it, the downstream work doesn't do it either.
Bring us to not only sustainability but also regenerative approach for city. So the building environment and nature are becoming a regenerative city, which that's the next challenge to come. Yeah.
Interesting.
And we need to speed up on that too, because I can see, if we look even in Saudi, the construction is still concrete, yeah,
Yes.
in many ways, and they're just covered up with mud or element that look sustainable, but they are not, yeah. So 2030 is around the corner, and 2050 is coming very fast, yeah. So we really have to be more responsible on how we design and how we think about it, and how we again question and challenge as well developer on are we doing are we going to the right direction? We never have an answer. Yeah. But at that time, we were trying to, you know, to make
That's fine.
at least
That's fine,
the
yeah.
best decision
I think
if we have the opportunity to do so. Yeah.
I think that's fine. We never have the answers. We're open to the possibilities, but there's the designers, there's the planners, there's us, the master planners, who think about all of this prior to it. And as Vigo mentioned earlier, you have to learn from past mistakes and really learn it quick. And then in terms of timing, you mentioned timing. We still have a few minutes, and I'm gonna open the floor for any of our audiences who wanted to raise up questions for our panelists in here.
Sometimes we get it right.
This is Mohammed Saleh from Trica LED. I'm sure that you have heard a lot what's going on in the Saudi market. And most of the projects, they're talking about value engineering, okay? And the value engineering which are being required, okay, for sure, it's due to lack of budget. I mean, I'll just give an example for lighting. Okay, there's one project where the budget has just decreased from, let's say, 100 million to just 20 million. So with this drop of 80% on the budget, for sure there's something has to be sacrificed, which is the quality, which is the design elements, which is the design concept. And I'm sure that there are, in many cases, they will not go back to the designer, either to the architect or to the lighting designer. I mean, the project execution, project consultants, they will be in charge of that. So, what's your opinion about this?
I mentioned earlier we're not going to discuss value engineering, but here we are being questioned.
I think the first thing is that someone was way off in their initial planning to be that far off budget, because you need to start. At some point, you have to come to a reality factor of what the project is, and to go from something that's less than half the budget, that's a completely different design exercise and probably a design approach. Yeah. So I think there's some sort of a miscommunication, and somebody went off on a tangent and wasn't really in the realm of reality of what the project was. The other thing is there's education involved, where it's our responsibility as leaders in our industry and designers to educate our clients and our developer clients that there is value in proper lighting, there is value in proper landscape, there is value in proper kind of understanding of sustainability and how to orient buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think all those things need to come in play. But I'd hate to have to value engineer lighting from 100 million to 20 million. That would be maybe use candles. I don't know.
I 100% agree. Something must have gone wrong there. But at the same time, the responsibility that we have is also to ask the right question very early.
Yes.
So, I mean, if we would look at this 100 million project, maybe we would have questioned them like, are you sure? Is there a strategic concept that we can discuss? What benchmarks are you looking for, and so on and so forth? And in that conversation, before there is any design, maybe there is something to find out which is better balanced. I mean, it's of course super easy to have like that kind of afterthought. But I just do think that, just maybe also coming back a bit to what we discussed before, developers today, they are, and have been for a long time maybe, but I find that they are hyper switched on, they are very knowledgeable, and they are extremely attentive of making those mistakes really quickly to be very, very, very sure that all the metrics are right from the beginning. Of course, when we are looking at these mega projects, I think we use a lot of time that has nothing to do with design, but just to kind of pressure testing what the brief actually is. So what I'm trying to say is just that conversation and asking those questions is gold. To do that very, very early.
We do have another question coming from here.
Hi. Sorry. So I live in Dubai, and every time a new development comes up or a new master plan comes up, you see it very, very, very modernized, very futuristic thinking, and the same is happening in Saudi Arabia. And you mentioned something about understanding the people and how they live. So I want to understand what is the percentage of your design initiative, where basically you take to, because if you look at it, so in order to combat the heat, for example, from coming into your apartment, you put glass outside, you reflect it, but then it's creating an urban environment where you can't live in it, you can't even walk. The master plan itself, the public realm, might be walkable, but then moving from city to city, you cannot. So how much are you guys going back to the way the initial people that lived in the city lived and apply that into the new master plans?
So maybe I just come with a small analogy there. When we were doing the competition, this is almost 20 years ago for KAFT, King Abdullah Financial District, we went around the world to kind of look at financial districts and so on and so forth. We ended up in Old Riyadh as the biggest inspiration of how to think about the adjacencies between building, the mass, the material, the textures, and all of that. And if you look at the plan actually from above, you can see that it has this kind of tendency of the small kind of laneways and so on. But what also happened was that we found out that the prevailing wind during nighttime comes from southwest, I believe. And actually the whole master plan is then opening up in order to kind of cool down all the hardscapes and so on, which then, together with the wadi that we introduced, actually is today 8 to 10 degrees lower in temperature on an yearly average in this region. So it might look futuristic, but actually the outset from the master plan derives from how, the older Riyadh was kind of constructed, which is a bit also in terms of flexibility and a bit kind of random and so on. So there are examples where that kind of comes in terms of try to kind of anchor it. We are working on another thing in Dubai actually, where all the inspiration comes from around the creek, not the new developments and so on, but how do you actually push down the scale and actually push up the scale where it's appropriate in order to find that right balance, because something's got to give in terms of the square meters and so on as well.
I think there's always a tension also. We're often asked to work for people who have a formula, and there are some developers who have an absolute formula of here are the buildings you should use and here are the sizes and here is designs we've done before, use that. And that's difficult because then it really fights against the innovation you need to bring. But we have occasional wins. A while ago, I was working on the Dubai Design District and trying to convince them that actually you need these very narrow corridors. They should be oriented this way. This should open here. And I was there last week with a colleague who had come from the States, and he was remarking about, wow, it's really comfortable in here. We were out in the public realm. He said, who designed this? And I went, and it was a great story. I loved it. It was fantastic. But there is things that have worked. And it's taking some of those principles and adjusting them enough that you get a decent contemporary environment. But there's also other ways we can do it. And I think I tell this story all the time. This part of the world, the Gulf, is the only part of the world where we have inverse urban heat island effects. You all know what urban heat island effects are, right? In most parts of the world, cities, because of the hard surfaces in cities, radiate more heat and are hotter than their surrounding areas. Most Gulf cities, especially coastal Gulf cities, are cooler than their surroundings. In Doha, it's around 6 degrees. In Abu Dhabi, it was 6 degrees as well. In Dubai, it was up to 10 degrees. And this was studied by MIT and Khalifa University, and they tried to figure out why is this happening. What happened in very short terms is that 30, 40 years ago, when people decided we're going to recycle all of our wastewater and we're going to irrigate trees, they took all of the satellite photographs from those years and correlated exactly the temperature changes to vegetation cover. And 100% matching is the vegetation cover arising from the way that we use wastewater results in inverse heat island effect. So there's always a way. Now, this was an accidental way. We can replicate that, though. Look at Green Riyadh. You look at the amount of greening that has happened in this city, in the last 5 years, it's astounding.
Thank you so much. I do have a quick fire question for everyone. I know I've been throwing out a lot of questions, but this one, I promise you, it should be just short, sharp, and quick answers, please, just before we end up. Before we wrap up, imagine you're stranded in a desert island, maybe an island here in Saudi. What would be that good urban design principle or an element of good urban design that you will bring in that particular island? One question, short and sharp answer, starting with you, Matthew.
Are we by ourselves? I was going to say a neighbor. That's what I would want. So, adjacencies, right? Adjacencies are important.
Okay.
I would say all life. So in a way, it could be an animal that is your neighbour, but designed for all life.
Okay. Bryce?
I don't know.
Maybe in terms of lighting, that's something, smart lighting.
Well, of course,
lighting.
I think the natural cycle are very important. The moon, and of course, we will have to be, much more suggestive and low level, and much more bring in the beautiful realm all around the island. I will probably go in that direction. Yeah.
Eric?
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be probably nature and access to shade if you're in this kind of environment, or some sort of shelter. And I think if you're on an actual island, being next to the water is wonderful. So, sounds great.
Viggo?
Super nice, small piazza with like a bit of greenery and a fountain, and where we all could kind of meet.
He had it all together. So there you go. I think that is the DNA that you should aim for in building or designing master plans or communities in Saudi. So thank you all, everybody, for attending here and hearing us. Thank you all for our lovely panelists.